Hey guys, I have a new webcam, so hopefully the sound is good and the video is good. But on to the point. This video is going to be about uh, a response to the response I got to my justice and mercy paradox video. And what I'm responding to is a YouTuber who claims that attacking the qualities of God is pointless if God has the authority to be unquestionable. So this YouTuber claims that even if um, what I'm claiming appears to contradict the nature of God and so make him impossible or some other unfortunate thing, the authority God has allows him to escape from my judgment, so to speak, of his actions and of his character. And so he said that what would be important and necessary to get rid of God would be to get rid of God's authority to do whatever he wants, because if God could be judged, then he could be considered logically, and you could discover things about God using logic. And so I thought I'd take a whack at destroying God's authority, because I think that is the one thing that saves him from logic and from reason, because we just assume he's not bound by it. So I wrote this down, and I'll be looking down a lot like this, but hopefully I get the ideas across all right. So here it goes. I wrote, if I murder, I offend God and man. If God murders, he offends no one. And this is because it's assumed that God, being God, has reason enough. He has perfectly good reasons for doing whatever he is doing that looks like it's bad. And so I ask, why do we assume this much? Why do we assume that God can get away with anything because he's God? And so I went through the list that I have of God's qualities, and I tried to find which quality or qualities would lend him authority to do whatever he wants. And so I asked, is God all just? And then from my other videos on justice and mercy, we know that God is not all just, because he's not just all the time to his fullest capacity. And we know that that's never the case with a being who is always just, which is what God is supposed to be. But anyways, and I say, no, he's not all just. And then they might say, okay, then he's all merciful. But from the same video and other videos, we know God is not all merciful, because he's not merciful to his fullest capacity at all times, which is never the case with a being who is always merciful. So we know God is not all just or all merciful, so those can't lend him authority. And then we say, okay, then if he's not those, he's at least all good. So he knows what's right and wrong to the perfect extent of understanding, and so you can't judge him. And to that I say, why do we exist on planet Earth? What's the point? Because the way I see it, if our life goals, if our only goals really are to praise God, and to get ourselves and others to heaven, why do we exist in the first place? Why even be on Earth? The reason I ask this is that God knows who's going to heaven and hell. And to that you might say, well, yeah, but he wants to let you run your course and see how you do and help others. But no, God knows who you're already going to help and who you're going to fail, and who's going to fail and who's going to succeed, and every bad and good action everyone on this planet is ever going to do forever. That's ever lived, ever will live. So if it turns out that in 10 years you're going to pray and then save someone else's life, or pray and you'll be saved, or whether or not you murder someone in 10 years, he knows all that already. He's taken it into account. He knew your entire history before you were born, so they say. So why would you exist in the first place? Why? Why not only exist for a second? For a second, in real time. The entire universe's life in a second. That way, no matter how much suffering there was, no matter how much good or evil or terrible things happened to people, it would be over in 1 second. God could do it. And it would still mean that everybody did whatever they did. It would just mean that there would be so much less suffering. So what we have, it seems to me, is a God who, as opposed to a scenario where there's 1 second or 2 seconds or 100 seconds or no seconds of human suffering, we have a God who prefers a scenario full of years of terrible, terrible human suffering to innocent people. And depending on which Christian sect you're from, you'll say babies are going to hell because they haven't been baptized or things like this. But the point is, God could have had us not even exist on earth to begin with, especially knowing some people are going to hell. So what we know is that God prefers needless, prolonged suffering instead of little or no suffering. So if all good means anything at all, we know God is not all good. And if you're trying to say that, well, all good doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't that he's going to stop suffering, what does it mean? Are you being good when you allow your loved ones to suffer needlessly, mind you, not just for a purpose? I'm talking about needlessly, because we don't need to exist to begin with, so we don't need to suffer or need to feel joy. We all have our outcomes already known to God. Why even exist on earth? So I think it's pretty clear after examining the world in this way, we can be pretty sure that God isn't all good, or at least questionably. Because anyone who prefers suffering to non-suffering is admittedly a little sick. So let's continue. We know that his justice, his mercy, and his goodness cannot lend him authority. So let's continue. Omnipotence or omniscience, could those lend him authority? And so he knows which actions are good and which are evil. That would be his omniscience. He knows everything. But simply knowing all actions and knowing whether or not they're good would only give him knowledge of those things. It would in no way ensure that he is always good or always trustworthy, or it would in no way logically tie him to forcing him to act in a certain way. So we can't be sure that God has reason enough or goodness enough to be trusted to make any action. Okay, so even though God knows about the good and evil actions, there's no aspect of knowing everything which would make you do only good actions or only just actions. So we know that his omniscience lends him no authority. Okay, so all-powerful, omnipotent. So because God is all-powerful, he can act in infinite mercy and goodness or justice. But again, like omniscience, being able to be good or evil does not ensure that he will. And just because God can do everything, and you might say, okay, well, everything includes the fact that he can be all good, they logically contradict. And so that in itself gets logically messy. And it boils down to the fact that if God can do everything, even if he's able to be all good, all just, and all merciful, you don't know if he is. So even if he's capable of those things, you still have no reason to be sure 100% that he will be good or just or have good enough reasons. And so neither omniscience nor omnipotence help you out. So where does that leave us? Going through God's qualities, the last one, omnipresence, he's everywhere. Being everywhere would, it would make you be everywhere, but it wouldn't make you a better judge of um, good or evil or give you authority to do things. It would just make you everywhere. And depending on how you look at it, I outlined in one of my videos how God is in fact not omnipresent. So whether or not you accept that God is omnipresent is irrelevant because it wouldn't lend him any authority. So where does that leave us? A God with no authority. He's able to be judged. He's able to be at fault, which is really important because once you can acknowledge that, you start to notice a lot of faults. We need a better God. Not that I'm a believer, but I'm saying there are better gods out there to choose from. You can even make one up. You can imagine one easily. Some sort of invisible role model, if you will, that is far superior to the Judeo-Christian God. And this argument may apply to other gods as well, but that's the only one I'm really focusing on. And we should really get rid of Yahweh. He is not a pleasant character at all. Yeah, so let me know what you think of that. I just thought I'd give it a good whack. If you notice some big holes in it that I missed or something, just let me know because I like to learn things. And yeah, so if this is effective at all, let me know whether it is or isn't, and be sure to tell me why, because that's the only thing that's really important. Oh, if you say that God is not bound by logic, logic doesn't apply to God, things like this, you're digging yourself in a hole, because then you can't be sure of anything about God, because as I've explained before, you can't be sure if God even means what he says, because the only reason you would feel that God would mean what he says is that you live in a world where people communicate by meaning what they say. So that is a logical connection, and if God does not have that that connection logically necessarily, you cannot be sure. Even if you believe it, you can't have a certainty about what God actually wants. And so you've actually dug yourself into a pit from which you will not escape. So that is my examination of God's authority and his lack thereof, really. So let me know what you think.